Welcome to Direction Northeast. Hello, I'm Dr. Rick Merritt. This program is a presentation of the Mass Communications Department of Northeast State Community College and is produced by the students through the college's video production facilities. This series of programs is designed to bring you the student perspective on events and happenings throughout Northeast Tennessee. The program is part of the classroom and laboratory learning process for students in broadcasting and advertising public relations part of the mass communications area. The father of today's guest was born and grew up in a world of class and racial separation. In 1984, Archbishop Desmond Tutu won the Nobel Peace Prize for his opposition to racial apartheid in South Africa. He was instrumental in freeing millions of people from a cruel form of modern racism. This episode of Direction Northeast explores this great man and what he did through the eyes of his daughter.
I've had a great experience at Northeast State. It has a lot to do with my teachers. They really set you up to succeed.
The cardiovascular technology program is one of 23 accredited programs in the United States. We have standards that are higher than other programs that we must meet.
With a new building and bigger facilities, it will enhance every student's experience.
The Regional Center for Health Professions located in the new Kingsport Academic Village houses all Northeast State's health-related programs. Northeast State, we're here to get you there.
As mentioned, our guest, Naomi Tutu, is the daughter of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. She has made her life cause to carry on her father's struggle for human rights and dignity. She has long spoken out and campaigned against racism and gender discrimination. Ms. Tutu, welcome to Direction Northeast. We're very pleased that you took the time to sit down with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we're going to talk to you today. First, I think the first question is, describe the conditions that you grew up under that are so different than what most children have grown up under today.
Well, apartheid was a system of racial segregation that existed in South Africa. And under apartheid, what I like to tell people is that your race determined everything about you from the time that you were born. As soon as you were born, you had to be registered, and at your birth, your race was an important part of the registration. And that racial classification determined the rest of your life. It determined where you could live, where you could go to school. It even determined what kind of job that you had. Under apartheid, we had the Job Reservations Act that reserved certain jobs for white people, jobs as diverse as skilled house painter to long-distance bus drivers, that people of color were not allowed to hold those jobs. Under apartheid, black people were only allowed to be in so-called white South Africa, which was 80% of the country, as employees of white firms or mines or industries. And part of the system that impacted me most directly as a young person was the Bantu education system. That when that system was introduced, the then Minister of Education stated that its aim was to ensure that black children would know that equality with whites would never be for them. And it set up a system of inferior education for black South Africans. At that time, I believe the government was spending 10 times more on each white child than it spent on each black child. So it was a system that basically separated the races. What my father always taught us, that the word apartheid meant separate, but if you say it out, it's apart-hate, and it teaches us that living apart leads to hate and mistrust of one another, and that was the system of apartheid in South Africa.
And now your father was able to help you get a better education. Can you tell us about how that occurred for you?
Yes, my parents actually were teachers under Bantu. Before Bantu education was put in place, they had both been teachers. And when it was introduced, there was a protest leaving of the teaching profession by many people, my parents included. And also, as part of leaving the profession, they said that they were going to try their best, that none of their children would have to go through that system. And we were fortunate in that, because of my father's place in the church and because of he had spent some time in England, was able to send us to boarding schools in neighboring countries. So I started elementary school at 6½, at a boarding school in Swaziland, which is a neighboring country. which was a 2 days drive away from where my parents lived. And so I spent 9 months out of each year from the time I was 6.5 till I was 10 away from my parents. And I was therefore able to get a good quality education. The cost was the cost of being far removed from my parents' love and care at such a young age.
After that, and after the education, what challenges do you think that you faced growing up the daughter of Desmond Tutu?
Well, first of all, my dad was not a world-famous figure when I was growing up. He was known in South Africa, and also he was a priest, and I know that any priest or minister's child will tell you that there are challenges just from that people have expectations of the children of clergy, that we will be very good and well behaved and love being in church, and so that was a challenge for me. That I enjoyed church most of the time, but I didn't want to be in church all the time, and I was never an angelic young person. So there were lots of questions about how can you be the daughter of a clergy and be getting into trouble at school. I was fortunate in that my mother, from very early in my life, made it clear to us, but also was very clear to people on the outside. She would tell them that in this house there is one priest, and that is Desmond. He chose to go to seminary. I'm not a priest, and none of my children are priests. None of us made that choice. And so that mitigated some of that challenge for me, that knowing that my mother stood there ready to protect us from being the expectation that we might be mini Desmonds. But even then, clearly there is, up against other people's expectations. And I think the biggest challenge for me became once he became known in the world, and that was then the expectation from people that, again, you would be like him, that his passions would be your passions, and his issues would be your issues. I think I was fortunate in a way in that I've always been passionate about gender issues and race issues.